Right here at home, the murder of a jogger in Queens has left a community on edge as the hunt for her killer continues.
At around 10:30 at night, police officers were moving slowly through the thick reeds along the running trail in Spring Creek Park in Brooklyn. Then, suddenly, they heard a man scream. When the officers rushed closer, they saw a father standing over his daughter's body. Karina Vetrano, a 30-year-old woman, was lying face down on the ground. Her athletic top and shorts had been pulled down. There were bruises on her face. Her teeth were broken, and her legs were covered in scratches. The officers tried to pull the father away from her body, but he wouldn't let go. He just kept repeating the same words over and over. "I have to take my daughter home." Just a few hours earlier, Karina had simply gone out for a run. She was an experienced runner and used to jog along that trail all the time with her father. But that day, he stayed home because of a back injury. Right before she left the house, she told him everything would be fine. 2 hours passed, and she never came back. When detectives began examining the crime scene, one thing became painfully clear. Karina had fought until the very end. At one point, she even bit her attacker so hard that she broke her own teeth. Investigators later found DNA under her fingernails. But when they ran it through the national database, it didn't match anyone. Which meant only one thing. Somewhere nearby, there was a man who had brutally attacked a woman in the middle of the day and then disappeared without a trace. But what investigators discovered later turned out to be far more horrifying than just a murder. DNA analysis revealed a terrifying secret, and when police finally found the killer, some of the officers said it was so disturbing that, it honestly gave them chills. A few of them even needed psychological help afterward. So, to really understand how this all happened, we have to go back to the very beginning. All right, friends, let me pause for just a minute. I'm really curious where my audience is watching from. So if you don't mind, tell me what city you're in and what time it is where you are right now. Thanks for taking a moment to do that. Drop it in the comments. And now, let's keep going. Karina Vetrano, a 30-year-old runner, was the kind of person who always pushed herself, always trying to go a little farther and a little faster. That day didn't seem any different from the others. At around 5 in the afternoon, she stepped out of her house to go for a run near Spring Creek, a quiet area that's part of East New York in Brooklyn. Spring Creek is a natural preserve that covers about 2 square miles. It's full of overgrown patches, tall weeds, and thick brush. The place sits just a few blocks from the home where Karina lived with her family. Most of the time, she ran there with her father Phil, a retired firefighter. But that day, he stayed home because of a back injury. Phil felt uneasy about her going there alone. The area was pretty isolated. And, he told her he didn't think it was a good idea for her to run there by herself.
"Don't worry, I'll be fine," she told him.
Just a few minutes before heading out for her run, Karina took a quick selfie. In the background of the photo, you can actually see her mom, Kathy, walking past behind her. Then Karina left the house. Phil later said that about 45 minutes after she walked out the door, he suddenly had this uneasy feeling, like something just wasn't right. By then, almost 2 hours had passed. Karina still hadn't come home. Phil tried calling her over and over again, but she never answered. So he reached out to a childhood friend of his who was working with the New York City Police Department at the time. A patrol car was sent to the area to look for her. When officers couldn't find Karina, the search quickly expanded. Units from the 106th Precinct joined in, moving through thick reeds that were as tall as 10 feet. And even as night fell, the search continued. When we were going along the trail and checking the area, there was this really strong sense of unease, said NYPD Detective Barry Brown. At one point, someone even said out loud, this doesn't feel right. Phil was also helping police during the search, using the geolocation signals from Karina's phone. Investigators eventually moved toward a marshy area about 15 feet off the running trail. Local residents had raised concerns about that area before. The tall weeds there had long been considered a safety problem for the community. At around 10:30 that night, officers suddenly heard a man screaming and immediately ran in that direction. It was Phil. He had found his daughter's body lying face down on the ground. Officers had to physically pull him away because he just couldn't let her go. He kept repeating that he needed to take her home. Detectives, including Barry Brown and Lieutenant John Russo, determined that Karina had bruises on her face and multiple injuries. Her teeth were broken, and there were abrasions on her legs. Her athletic top and shorts had been pulled down. Police said there was evidence pointing to sexual assault. Karina had fought her attacker so fiercely that she bit him with such force that she broke her own teeth. Investigators also noticed that one of her hands was tightly gripping grass, which suggested she may have been dragged across the ground. The chief of detectives, Boyce, later said it was obvious that she fought until the very end. The office of the medical examiner later performed an autopsy and determined that her death was a homicide caused by strangulation. While the killer was choking her, he pressed his hand against her neck so hard that police could actually see the imprint of his hand. Phil later said he felt like it was somehow meant to be him who found her. She led me to her. She needed her dad to be the one who found her. There's no doubt about that, he said.
It's one of the most intense and difficult crime scene searches in recent years. The view from Chopper 2 shows the demanding scope of the task.
We have a very active crime scene in a very remote area. So we're searching this as best we can in a very tough condition. The grass is very high. We're using machetes to search for additional evidence wherever we go.
Thursday, dozens of detectives fanned across Howard Beach, interviewing landscapers and home improvement workers.
They're just asking us what time we shut up and were you working Tuesday. They want this guy, whoever he is. I hope they get him.
Tonight, teams of search crews continue to tackle the dense weeds 300 feet at a time. First, hacking away by hand with machetes. They don't want to damage any possible clues as they clear the area.
We're clearing a very vast area in the back adjacent to the crime scene, and we're conducting a search for evidence.
The mother and father are just visibly shaken. They want closure. They want justice. They want to be able to bury their daughter with dignity.
We all jog and we all walk out here and enjoy, the serenity. And now I'm afraid to go out.
At his latest briefing, the chief of detectives calling this case, quote, a severe community threat and taking the following steps. A 6-month review of all Parks police activity in the area, collecting information from the police department's sex offender monitoring unit, and continuing with their cell phone tower investigation. But so far, just the possibility that the killer may not have been someone Karina Vetrano knew, well, it certainly leaves residents on edge.
My concerns is that, if it's somebody that lives in the area, that he might do it again.
Karina's father described Karina Vetrano as cheerful, driven, and successful, the kind of daughter every parent dreams about. Even though she was only 4 feet 11 inches tall, her personality was incredibly strong. She was very intelligent and had earned a master's degree from St. John's University. While still living with her parents, she worked as a speech therapist in Manhattan, helping children with disabilities. According to her friend Erica, Karina was like a spark, a tiny firework of energy with this contagious laugh that, could fill an entire room. Besides her job as a speech therapist, she also worked part-time as a promoter at a club in Astoria, where she invited guests and earned a percentage from the revenue generated by VIP services. Friends also told investigators about a man named Paul, an employee at the nightclub where Karina worked. They said he had made unwanted advances toward her and would become aggressive when she rejected him. At one point, they believed he might even have been stalking her. However, police later ruled him out as a suspect after confirming that he was at work at the time of the murder. And the more investigators looked into the case, the more it started to seem like this might have been a random killing carried out by a stranger.
We are still in the process of crime scene collecting evidence right now. We will be out there for several days. That is a remote area. We have crime scenes set up there, and we plan to chop down just about every weed in that location until we satisfied that we got all the evidence. Now, we have a lot of forensic evidence acquired so far, but we're not getting a lot of Crime Stopper tips. We have 3, and they're all pretty generic. So we have since raised the reward up for $10,000 for any information. That is a very strong community. I'll be out there as soon as I leave here. We've got nothing but support from everybody out there. We hope to have more information. Now, this is a remote area. Young lady was running, still daylight, so hoping somebody saw something going into the park. Thus far, we don't have a lot of leads on this right now, but we're still collecting evidence. The evidence that we've collected thus far is in the Office of Chief Medical Examiner. We're hoping to get it up on a DNA profile in the next couple of days. We have them, I tell you, we have them often in this city. No one is this subject of murder. They're usually late at night. If we have them on the street, rape one, where stranger rapes are down in this city, nonetheless, we still get them. This type of incident where you have a jogger in a park, in a recreational center, in daylight hours is extraordinarily unusual.
About 400 people came to Karina Vetrano's funeral. Among them were several members of the New York City Fire Department. She was full of life, Phil said during his farewell speech. She lived every single day like it was her last, putting as much life as she could into every minute. In just 30 short years, she accomplished more than some people do in an entire lifetime. And we weren't just father and daughter. We were, like, one and the same.
She was a beautiful girl, young. I didn't know her, but it's sad.
I'm going to address the coward.
Whoever killed her daughter, Karina, for the first time since the brutal murder, the Vetranos spoke with reporters outside of their home.
You know that my daughter was a force to be reckoned with. And I guarantee you that you will be reckoning with that force, not only for the rest of your pathetic life, but for the rest of eternity as you burn in hell. My daughter was a big believer of karma. And as you could see, she's magical. The whole world knows she's magical. And I guarantee you, you will pay forever.
Justice will be served, okay? That's why we have the PD. That's why we have God. Justice will be served.
Investigators were not able to recover usable DNA from the sexual assault evidence kit. However, they did manage to build a DNA profile using material found under Karina's fingernails, as well as on her cell phone, which was discovered just a few feet from her body. Her murder deeply shook the tight-knit community, and many people were living in fear, trying to understand what had happened. Thousands of people also donated money to a reward fund for information that could help identify the killer. Police contributed $25,000, the mayor's office added another $10,000, and the remaining funds were raised through GoFundMe.
They're tracking everything down. But what we need for someone to say, hello, I know the guy. That's what we're looking for. If I wake up and there's nothing for me to do, that's when the bottom's going to drop out. So I have to stay involved every day in every way. Today it's this. This is keeping me alive today.
A tractor with an industrial mower was brought to the crime scene, along with dozens of police officers from different units. Because the land where Karina's body was found was under federal ownership, the New York City Police Department asked the FBI for assistance. Federal agents supported the investigation by providing additional resources. They even used drones to survey the area from above. Police also said they checked a homeless encampment located more than 1 mile from the crime scene, but investigators eventually concluded it was likely not connected to the murder. They also questioned registered sex offenders who lived nearby, along with several people known to spend time living inside the park itself. To increase the resources dedicated to the investigation, the NYPD created a special task force. It included 2 detectives from each of the 8 units of Queens South. At the same time, officials had to address safety concerns inside the park. A federal officer explained that the large area where Karina was killed was only monitored around the perimeter, and even those checks were irregular throughout the day. The same officers were responsible for patrolling parts of Gateway National Park in Brooklyn and Queens, which also includes Spring Creek. This is a serious challenge for us. We've talked about it with the community before, and honestly, it's no secret, said the commander of the U.S. Park Police District. Investigators said that with no eyewitnesses, their most important lead was the DNA profile. That profile had already been checked, but at that moment it still hadn't produced a match in the national database. The CODIS database that we use for DNA was only created in 1998, so this person could have been in prison before that, explained Chief of Detectives Boyce. But it could also be someone younger, someone who's never been in prison at all. In a case like this, it was crucial to check whether anything similar had happened before. Early in the investigation, detectives in New York said they had been contacted by the Massachusetts State Police to see if there might be a connection between Karina's murder and the killing of Vanessa Marcotte. a 27-year-old Google account manager who was found dead in Princeton on August 7th. At the time, Vanessa lived in New York City, but she had traveled to Princeton to visit her mother. On August 7th, she went out for a run and never came back home. Later, her body was discovered in a wooded area about half a mile from her mother's house. Authorities in New York said they could not confirm any connection between the two cases. Still, they emphasized that investigators would continue checking every possible lead. Chief of Detectives Boyce said investigators still believe Karina's murder was random. Their main theory hadn't changed. They believed the suspect escaped through the dense brush surrounding the crime scene and eventually made his way toward Belt Parkway. Police examined every possible escape route, but surveillance cameras did not capture any clear image of a suspect. Every house near the park was checked, and residents were interviewed. Investigators even used the phrase, "a needle in a haystack," and honestly, that's exactly what the search felt like. As the high-profile case continued to draw more public attention, a Verizon employee who had been working in Spring Creek Park on the day Karina was killed contacted the police. He told detectives that he had seen a man who seemed suspicious. The man was wearing a wool cap and was in the area around the same time investigators believed the attack had happened. Based on that description, a composite sketch was created and released to the public on August 31st.
At a press conference, Chief Boyce says one particular thing stands out.
And if you'll notice the dark wool hat, remember the day was August 2nd. It's a little unusual he's wearing a wool hat in the area there.
And now a laser-sharp focus on this bike path where, unfortunately, there are no cameras. And finding this man, who police say is black, 5'10", between 35 and 45 years old, with a medium build.
We have to speak to this person, so that's the only reason we're putting it out.
After the composite sketch was released, a former NYPD supervisor contacted Robert Boyce. At the time, he was working as the head of security at a residential building in Brooklyn, and he said that one of the residents looked a lot like the man in the sketch. Police went to the apartment. The man, whose name was Kevin, refused to open the door at first. Officers stayed outside the building until he eventually came out. Kevin admitted that, yeah, there was some resemblance to the sketch, so he was taken to the station for questioning. Once there, he refused to provide a DNA sample. Detective Barry Brown later said that decision immediately caught everyone's attention in the room. Police eventually obtained his DNA using a discarded water bottle he had thrown away. But when the results came back, the analysis showed that Kevin's DNA did not match the profile connected to the crime scene. After that lead was ruled out, investigators were basically back at square one. Hoping to generate new information, Crime Watch Daily released surveillance footage showing Karina just a few hours before her murder. The video was recorded during what police described as her usual running route. Her family and investigators were both hoping it might reveal some kind of clue. Authorities said it was the last known image of Karina. Karina's loved ones also came together to retrace some of the last routes she was known to have taken. When the DNA still didn't match anyone in the database, Phil urged investigators to use a method called familial searching, basically checking whether any relatives of the possible killer might already be in the database. You could find the killer, he said. You might be able to trace a direct connection, and that would narrow the search down a lot. At the time, that kind of testing method was being used in 9 states, but not in New York. So Phil started a petition, hoping to change that.
Familial DNA searching goes deeper, using special software to look for a similar, not exact match, indicating the suspect could be related to someone in the system.
There's untold amount of cold cases that'll be solved by this.
But the ACLU is pushing back, saying that such policy could lead to, quote, miscarriages of justice.
Well, I think they're just ignorant of the facts that we are just targeting criminals.
6 months after she was found dead, police now have a person of interest in the case of murdered jogger Karina Vetrano.
One man was taken into custody. The next day, he was officially arrested and he said, "Please tell my mom I'm sorry. Could I speak with someone from the victim's family? I'm sorry for what I did." The events that led to that moment actually began about a month earlier, after weeks and months had passed without any major breakthroughs in the investigation. In January 2017, Lieutenant John Russo took another look at the case. He was one of the officers who had been at the scene when Karina was found, and he also lived in Howard Beach. While reviewing the case files, Russo suddenly remembered an incident from May 2016 just a few months before Karina's murder. And, he started to wonder if it might actually be connected to the investigation. On the other side of the street, near the house next door, I saw someone walking away from me. The person was wearing a tracksuit with long sleeves and a hood pulled over their head, even though it was about 80 degrees outside. And I remember thinking, that's strange. Russo said the man seemed to be looking over the houses nearby, and that made him call the police. But by the time officers arrived, the person was already gone. The very next day, neighbors reported similar suspicious behavior. They said a man wearing a black and white tracksuit had walked onto several private properties. Later, Russo ran into the same man again and asked for his name. His name was Chanel Lewis. At the time, Russo figured that was probably the end of it and that their paths would never cross again. But in January, the memory came back to him. He had this strong feeling about it, like something just didn't sit right. So he started digging deeper into Chanel Lewis. He discovered that Lewis didn't have a criminal record, but he had received several summonses connected to the Brooklyn side of Spring Creek Park, across from the section of the preserve located in Queens. After that, Chief Boyce received a call from Russo. There was something in Lieutenant Russo's voice that made me think, this might actually be the one, Boyce said, so we jumped on it right away. When investigators began speaking with Chanel Lewis, he told officers he knew the area very well. According to him, he was mostly a loner with very few friends, and he often walked along the trails to listen to music and clear his head. While cooperating with detectives, he voluntarily provided a DNA sample. Officers also visited his former high school and discovered that his past appeared to be troubled and complicated. According to news reports, while he was still in school, he once told a teacher's aide that he wanted to stab his female classmates. "I want to stab all the girls." According to reports, he said that on May 17, 2011, when he was 15 years old. Sources also said that at one point he allegedly asked, "What would happen if I brought a knife to school?" Sources said the school notified the police, and he was taken into custody as a person with emotional disturbances. He was transported to Kings County Hospital Center for evaluation and later released. The following month, according to reports, school staff contacted law enforcement again after he allegedly cursed at a female student and threatened her and her family. He was once again taken to the hospital and later released. One tabloid article also claimed that he had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, but that information appears never to have been independently confirmed. During research into the case, that claim only appeared in an article from the New York Post. In September 2011, he was reportedly transferred to a private school for students with emotional and behavioral difficulties. Former classmates later said he was known as a loner and was often bullied at school. "They used to beat him all the time," one student said. "Even girls would pick on him and hit him. He didn't have any friends." Another former student said that sometimes he tried to fight back, but that didn't happen very often. One classmate who rode the school bus with him said many people made fun of him because of the way he dressed and the way he looked. At the same time, several former students said they never knew him as an aggressive or confrontational person. "He always walked around school with his hood pulled over his head," one of them said. The executive director of Martin de Porres Schools later said that Chanel Lewis graduated in August 2015, and during his time there were no reports that he had threatened anyone. While he was at the school, there were no disciplinary records connected to him, and there were no other reports of threatening statements directed at other students, the director said in a statement. Chanel's father stood up for his son, but at the same time he pointed investigators to one important detail. He told detectives that his son couldn't have committed the crime because the day after the murder he had taken him to the hospital. Chanel was treated there for a hand injury. He said he had gotten it during a fight. After checking local hospitals, detectives managed to find the doctor who had treated him. According to Detective Barry Brown, the doctor said he had removed a foreign object from Chanel's hand. The DNA sample taken from Chanel's voluntary swab was then run through the system, and it matched the DNA found at the scene of Karina's murder. That foreign object removed from Chanel's hand was now believed to be a fragment of Karina's broken tooth, which had snapped off when she bit him.
I'm Detective Deal. You're located at the 107 Precinct, 2nd floor, Detective Squad area. Today's date is February 5th, 2017. Time is approximately 10:33 a.m. And I'm activating the tape this time.
Now that I've advised you of your rights, are you willing to answer questions?
Okay.
Yes? Okay. All right. All right, Chanel, why don't we start with, I think it was a Tuesday evening on August 2nd, 2016. Do you remember that date and that evening?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And where were you at that time?
I was in at the Gateway and Spring Creek Mall.
Okay, by Gateway and Spring Creek Mall?
Spring Creek Park.
Park?
Yeah.
All right. Were you inside the park?
Yeah.
Okay. And was anyone with you, or were you by yourself?
By myself.
All right. About what time did you get to the park?
About 5 o'clock.
And were you on a trail or you in the grass?
On the trail.
Okay. Now, while you were in the park, did something happen?
Yes.
What happened while you were in the park?
On the park, there was this girl jogging, and then I one thing led to another because some other situation.
All right. Well, the girl that was jogging, was she by herself or with anybody else?
By herself.
And when you first saw her, where were you? Were you in the grass or were you on the trail?
On the trail.
All right. And were you moving or were you standing still?
Like I was moving, listening to music.
You were walking or jogging?
Walking.
Walking? And you were walking towards her?
I was walking towards and then got side to side and then one thing led to another.
You said as she got next to you, when she got next to you as she was running and you were walking, what happened then?
And then, because of a past situation, I got angry and then started hitting her and stuff like that.
Okay. Before you did, where did you hit her?
Like in the face and like in the mouth.
In the face and the mouth. Before you hit her, did you grab her or did you just hit her right away?
Like kind of grabbed her first.
Grabbed her? And like, how did you grab her? What part of her body did you grab?
Like I started hitting her because of the incident that was going on earlier.
Right, but did you grab her before you started hitting her, or was the first thing you did was to hit her? What was the first thing you did?
I grabbed her.
Okay. And how did you grab her?
Like this.
Okay. With both hands?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what part of her body did you grab? Do you remember her shoulders, her waist, her neck? Do you remember?
Like around here.
Okay, around the shoulders. Did she say anything at all? No. Did she scream?
No, because her tooth broke.
I'm sorry? Her tooth broke? Right. Were you covering her mouth at all? No? Okay. How long would you say you were hitting her for? About how long in time?
The whole thing was like about 5 minutes.
5 minutes, all right. How far off the path would you say you dragged her into the grass? Like how many feet about?
Probably about 10.
Okay. What was the status of her clothing? How was her clothing
Kind of
arranged?
like pulled off.
Pulled off?
Yeah.
Okay, what was pulled off?
Like her clothes.
Now, you said you did this because you had some anger, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Can you tell me about that anger?
Because, I used to live in a different address than I currently live right now.
Right.
And then sometimes there's this man that comes around there. He play like loud music and carry a lot of friends around there. I didn't like it because I feel unsafe and comfortable. And I like my place private and peaceful. And usually I just...
No, I know, Chanel, I know that, like last night, you really didn't want to talk about this, right? Last night. But today, it was okay. You wanted to talk about it, right? I know that you told Detective Brown you wanted to straighten your life out, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then Detective Brown said to wait until you came in the room to talk about it. That's right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you did, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Chanel Lewis, who was 20 years old, was arrested and charged with second-degree murder.
He was held without bail.
Why'd you do it?
Janelle! We were hiding out for 6 months. Come out. Look this way, look this way, look this way. Look this way. Look this way, right here, sir.
After his arrest, Karina's family reached out to the public and asked for opinions on how the remaining money from the GoFundMe fund should be used. You all made donations, so you all deserve to have a voice, Phil wrote on the fundraising page. Later, Phil said he distributed nearly $300,000, including making a contribution to Archbishop Malloy High School to create a scholarship in Karina's honor. After that, Chanel Lewis was formally indicted by a grand jury on multiple charges. In total, there were 13 counts related to murder and sexual assault connected to the death of Karina Vetrano. He was facing the possibility of life in prison without parole. Lewis pleaded not guilty.
Tonight, Lewis's relatives say it's not possible.
To the family, I'm sorry for their loss, but they have the wrong person.
Richard Lewis is the suspect's father.
He's a wonderful young man. Wonderful young man.
My brother is a skinny, you saw him on the TV. He's a skinny guy who cannot kill such a strong girl because she's a strong person. He alone can never kill a person like that.
Today, I would like to thank all those who have reached out and give their support for me and my family. I love my son. I support my son. I raised my son to be a God-fearing man and to respect life. My son is friendly, God-fearing, and would not hurt anybody. My son has a mental health problem and needs help. He's not a criminal and needs mental resources. Please respect my family privacy. Please respect my family privacy in this matter and allow my son to get help in due process.
Karina's family spent a long time pushing for investigators to start using familial DNA searching in criminal cases. Then, in June 2017, the New York State Commission on Forensic Science agreed to allow that method to be used in investigations involving murder, rape, and certain other serious crimes. The decision was made despite objections from civil rights organizations, which argued that the practice could pull law-abiding people into criminal investigations simply because of their family connections. By the time the commission approved the policy, Chanel Lewis had already been arrested. So the decision didn't change anything for Karina's case, but it could affect future investigations. As mentioned earlier, investigators had also looked into a possible connection between Karina's murder and the killing of Vanessa Marcotte. Later, authorities determined that the two cases were not related. On April 15, 2017, officials announced that Angelo Colon Ortiz, who was 31 years old, had been arrested after DNA evidence linked him to Vanessa's case. He later pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and unarmed robbery, and on November 2, 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison. He will not be eligible for parole until 2067, when he will be 81 years old. November 2018.
It was packed inside of the courtroom, filled with family and friends on both sides. As you mentioned, it was also very emotional. Karina Vetrano's mother was inside of that courtroom. She held onto a cross most of the time, crying. Karina Vetrano's accused killer, Chanel Lewis, obviously in the courtroom. His mother was there as well, and she held onto a Bible, also in tears most of the time. Now, opening statements got underway. Defense attorneys with the Legal Aid Society representing Lewis told jurors today Lewis is innocent. They have serious doubts about the evidence, adding there are no witnesses, and Lewis was coerced into confessing, and people are rushing to judgment.
In his opening statement, Assistant District Attorney Brad Leventhal said, "They crossed paths by chance. She didn't provoke him. He saw her, and he killed her." Prosecutors said that Chanel didn't have a girlfriend, had very few social connections, and didn't have a job. They described him as someone who often carried a lot of anger. According to their theory, it was that anger that led to the attack, which they described as random. That day, he took out his anger on a beautiful young woman, a girl wearing a top, the prosecutor said. However, the defense pushed back against those claims. There won't be any eyewitnesses. No one is going to walk into this courtroom and say, "He did it," said defense attorney Jenny Chung. She also argued that the prosecution was trying to, force a square peg into a round hole. Chung questioned the police interrogation of her client as well, which lasted more than 10 hours. Procedures were shortened. The prosecution's evidence is incomplete, she said. The defense also claimed that the DNA evidence linking Chanel Lewis to the crime scene was unreliable. Attorney Robert Moeller argued that the crime scene had been compromised by multiple people, including Karina's father, and therefore could not be considered a fully reliable source of evidence. Lewis's lawyers also said the confession had been obtained improperly and should not have been used in court. According to them, he confessed only because he wanted to leave after waiting for hours. but the prosecution focused heavily on what he actually told police. He was angry, and he took that anger out on Karina Vetrano. Those are his own words. He is the man who strangled Karina Vetrano, the prosecutor said. The prosecution also emphasized what they described as strong DNA evidence. An expert witness testified that the DNA profile taken from material found under Karina's fingernails, on her neck, and on her cell phone matched Chanel's DNA profile. 2 NYPD detectives also testified about the detailed and extensive process used to collect evidence in the case. Some of the images shown during testimony were so disturbing that Karina's parents were visibly shaken. At times, they couldn't hold back their tears, and at one point, they even had to leave the courtroom.
Closing arguments on the emotional trial over the death of 30-year-old Karina Vetrano have now wrapped up. The prosecution painting the suspect, 22-year-old Chanel Lewis, as a frustrated, angry, and lonely young man who spotted Vetrano on an after-work jog at a park in Howard Beach and took out all his anger by taking her life.
He was mad, and he took out his anger, and he took out his frustrations on Karina, grabbing her, throwing her to the ground, beating her, and strangling her until she was dead.
But the defense argued that it was the police department that was frustrated with their 6-month-long investigation that had yet to find a suspect, that Lewis was singled out, and that detectives worked endlessly to fit evidence they had to build a case against him.
They never allowed the evidence to develop a theory. Rather, they just wanted the evidence to fit their theory.
The exhausting trial lasted 7 days. Soon, it was time for the jury to decide the fate of the case. After a long day of deliberations, the jurors spent more than an hour reviewing the second of the defendant's 2 recorded confessions. They also asked to have 74 pages of testimony from the prosecution's DNA expert read back to them. On top of that, the jury requested to look again at the autopsy photographs of Karina. After a day and a half of deliberations, 5 jurors said they could not return a guilty verdict beyond a reasonable doubt. That created what's known as a hung jury. The jurors sent a letter to the judge, explaining that they could not overcome their disagreements and had already exhausted every option to reach a unanimous decision. After a full day of deliberations, we remain divided. It seems like we can't move forward anymore. We believe we've exhausted all possible options. Because of that deadlock, the judge declared a mistrial.
The parents of Karina Vetrano looking somber and stunned leaving the courtroom. Relatives in tears after the judge declared a mistrial, a ruling which sent shock through the courtroom.
Sir, Mr. Vetrano.
Just a moment. Your comment. Stunned silence from the family of Karina Vetrano moments after learning justice would be delayed.
Vetrano's family did not speak after the ruling. Lewis's legal team, however, did.
Jury is understanding that DNA is not all it. Confession is not all it. And there are issues in the case that, as you all see, it's much more complex.
Is this a win for you?
Yeah.
Well, it's not a conviction, so I guess that's a good thing, but closure would be a good thing too.
That decision meant the case would have to be tried all over again, which made the legal process drag on even longer. For Karina's family and loved ones, it meant continuing a painful ordeal. They would have to relive the details of the tragedy once again and go through another trial in their search for justice. Prosecutors didn't want to take any chances during the second trial, so they prepared new evidence. One of the key pieces was a detailed record of Chanel's internet searches leading up to his arrest. Among those searches were queries about indictments, plea deals, criminal prosecution, and news reports about Karina's murder. Then, in March 2019, the retrial began.
Karina Vetrano's father returned to the stand today in the retrial of the man accused of strangling her back in 2016.
At one point, Vetrano's father dropped to his knees in front of the jurors as he emotionally described finding his daughter's stiff, cold body in a nearby trail.
The defense once again insisted that their client was innocent, arguing that his earlier recorded confession had been obtained under pressure. His attorneys also claimed that if he had truly been the killer, his DNA would have been found all over the crime scene in much larger quantities. But the prosecution remained firm. Prosecutors emphasized that the defendant's DNA matched the evidence, and they also pointed to the recorded confessions in which he admitted that he killed her. Then, just 1 day before the jury was supposed to begin deliberations in the retrial, the defense attorneys received an anonymous letter. It was supposedly written by an NYPD officer who expressed concerns about the investigation. The letter included several allegations about the early stages of the case. Among other things, it claimed that during the first strategy meetings, NYPD Chief Michael Kemper repeatedly said police were looking for 2 strong white men from Howard Beach. Sonny Hostin, a senior legal correspondent for ABC News, reported that if the letter turned out to be genuine and the concerns described in it were accurate, it could potentially become grounds for an appeal. One of Lewis's attorneys said, "We received disturbing and credible information suggesting that the police withheld critically important details about other potential suspects, and that information was never shared with the defense." The defense also said it had become known that police approached Lewis to obtain a DNA sample as part of a large-scale sweep that, according to them, showed racial bias. During that operation, DNA samples were collected from more than 360 African-American men in Howard Beach and nearby areas of Brooklyn and Queens. In light of this new information, we plan to file a motion on Monday requesting a hearing regarding the prosecution's failure to disclose exculpatory evidence, as well as a separate hearing concerning unconstitutional racial profiling during this investigation, the attorneys said. In response, Sergeant Brendan Ryan said that the NYPD had conducted a thorough investigation into the murder. And as the prosecution presented by the Queens District Attorney shows, the evidence clearly demonstrates that Chanel Lewis is responsible for her death. He also noted that numerous court hearings and 2 criminal trials, which took place over more than 2 years, had already carefully examined the issues raised in the anonymous letter. According to him, the letter contained many false claims and inaccuracies. Assistant District Attorney Leventhal also said, "This anonymous letter contains no verifiable information. The person who wrote it is clearly trying to disrupt the trial."
This morning, the judge denied a request from the defense asking for a hearing on this.
After that, the case was handed over to the jury for deliberation. The importance of that moment was obvious. The first trial had already ended in a deadlock, with the jury unable to reach a verdict and the court declaring a mistrial. Neither side was treating the outcome with too much confidence or complacency. There was a lot at stake, not just for the prosecution and the defense, but also for Karina's family, who had already endured years of uncertainty. On April 1st, 2019, the verdict was finally announced. Inside the courtroom, everyone held their breath.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
Chanel Lewis was found guilty.
A very different response this time around from Vetrano's parents leaving the courtroom.
God, tell us what's going through your mind right now. Mrs. Vetrano. Thank you.
Keep moving on. Say it again.
Thank you, Jesus. Sir, your thoughts?
Jubilation.
You're not allowed to interview.
Justice.
I'm thanking those jurors for listening to the overwhelming evidence.
All the anger, all the years of pain, but mostly the anger was lifted and gone.
Lewis lifted his handcuffed hands in a farewell wave to his family and supporters as he was led off to jail. Some of those supporters today say they've followed the case very closely, and a family spokesperson says they question the verdict.
How does a young man walk into Howard Beach, murder a young lady that was physically fit, and walk out of Howard Beach without being seen on any camera from the Gateway Mall, any camera in Howard Beach at all?
After the guilty verdict was finally delivered, the case once again slipped into a state of uncertainty.
Now to a stunning development in the Karina Vetrano murder case. Sentencing for her convicted killer has been postponed because of new claims of juror misconduct.
His family, it was another painful blow, and a reminder that even a guilty verdict doesn't always bring an immediate or final sense of closure. It was claimed that one of the jurors accused 3 others of ignoring the judge's instructions about when and how the case was allowed to be discussed. The judge agreed to delay sentencing in order to hold a hearing with the jurors. Queens District Attorney Richard A. Brown later responded to the defense's accusations, presenting a different version of what had happened inside the jury room. In a sworn written statement referenced in the motion, Juror A claimed that Juror B had started expressing conclusions about the case from the very beginning of the trial and continued doing so throughout the proceedings. According to the statement, Juror B told Juror A, I've already made up my mind, and I hope you have too. After the victim's parents testified on the second day of the trial, District Attorney Brown wrote that those comments from Juror B identified in the motion as the fourth juror did not show prior bias. Instead, he said they reflected an emotional reaction to the shocking testimony about the condition of the victim's body. During deliberations, jurors are required to rely only on the evidence presented in court. However, according to a sworn statement, some jurors began bringing up information that had never been introduced as evidence, and some of that information may not have been accurate. Juror D told the others that the absence of the defendant's DNA and samples from the victim's intimate area could be explained by the idea that the body might have absorbed the male DNA. She allegedly told Juror A,
"I know this better than you, you're just a man. I was raped."
She argued that by saying this, the juror had improperly supplemented the evidence presented in court with her own personal experience. Because of that, other jurors may have felt they couldn't question her statement and were forced to accept it as fact. That kind of communication was described as juror misconduct, since she had essentially become an unsworn expert supporting the prosecution. In other words, the jury had stepped beyond the evidence that was officially presented in court. Attorneys from the Legal Aid Society representing Chanel Lewis, Robert Moeller, Julia L. Burke, and Jenny Chung submitted these arguments to the court. However, Juror D denied ever telling the other jurors that she had been a victim of rape. In a sworn statement submitted along with the prosecution's response, she wrote,
"I've never been raped, and I have never told anyone that I was raped. As far as I know, during the deliberations, no other juror said that she had been raped either."
In another example mentioned in the motion, defense attorneys said that one of the jurors had drawn conclusions based on information that was never part of the evidence presented in court. Juror C compared injuries from a completely unrelated rape case with the injuries suffered by Karina Vetrano and claimed that sexual assault had been proven because the injuries in both cases were the same. The motion argued that the information Juror C shared with the other jurors was improper because it essentially introduced facts that had never been presented during the trial and went beyond a juror's ordinary life experience, knowledge, or common sense. Juror C admitted that he had mentioned his experience serving on a jury in a previous rape case. However, he said another juror immediately told him not to do that, and after that he stopped discussing any details from his earlier jury service. According to a sworn statement from one of the jurors, the district attorney defended the jury's actions. It was stated that none of the jurors presented themselves as professional experts. Instead, each person simply relied on their own life experience and expressed their personal opinion as an ordinary citizen. That wasn't misconduct.
After the verdict, CBS 2 spoke to the jury foreman who called it a slam dunk case. When asked what the most damning evidence was,
Two things. The confession, it wasn't coerced. DNA was like so overwhelming.
he said the jury was unanimous on the murder charges, but there were at least 2 holdouts on the sex abuse charges.
However, in another interview after the verdict, one of the jurors who agreed to speak with reporters anonymously said he had felt pressure from other jurors to vote for a guilty verdict. In the end, the judge rejected the claims of juror misconduct. After that decision, the sentencing could finally move forward. April 23, 2019.
With respect to murder in the first degree, the sentence of this court is that you spend the rest of your natural life in jail without any possibility of parole.
It's the moment the family of Karina Vetrano has been waiting more than 2.5 years for, giving passionate testimonies in the courtroom ahead of sentencing for Chanel Lewis, the man who will now serve life in prison for her death.
There were no more Merry Christmases, no more Happy New Years, no more happy birthdays. There is no more pleasure in life, no more smiles, no more happiness. Those are all taken by that convicted, murdering rapist. Only my faith in God and my belief in heaven keeps me from killing myself for fear of not being allowed into heaven to see my baby again.
Describing his family walking the earth as zombies just waiting to see Karina, Phil Vetrano told 22-year-old Chanel Lewis his daughter had a message for him.
She told me that if you stand up here today in court and ask for her forgiveness, tell her you're sorry, she will forgive you. But remember, those are not my words. And I will never forgive you.
Her mother brought a piece of Karina into the courtroom.
These are Karina's shoes. These are the shoes that she put on the morning of August 2nd as she prepared to work and wore throughout the workday. As tiny as they are, Your Honor, these are the shoes of a giant, a valiant warrior, and a queen.
At times, you could see Lewis over her shoulder.
The vacant expression you show is merely a reflection of your detached and empty soul. You suffered and died a million deaths every second of every day. You breathed, you ate, you searched your phone for pornography and forcible rape. But God was watching you all the time, Chanel Lewis.
The judge added 32 years in prison to the life sentence for second-degree murder and sexual assault. This is a situation where both families have lost, he said. The worst nightmare any parent could imagine: your child goes out for a run and never comes back. One day, you'll see that the people who followed this case will move on with their lives, and you'll be left alone. But I'll tell you this, when that day comes, you'll be behind bars.
The defense spoke on behalf of Lewis, and then he said just a few words.
I'm innocent. I'm sorry for the family's loss, but I didn't do this.
Those who believe in his innocence argued that the NYPD was under intense pressure to quickly find a suspect and close the case, and that investigators focused on him because of that pressure. Around 40,000 people signed a petition calling for the case to be reviewed by the Conviction Integrity Unit. Despite the calls for his release and the ongoing public debate, the legal outcome did not change. After 2 trials, 1 mistrial, and years of reviews and disputes, the jury found him guilty and the court issued its final sentence. For the justice system, that verdict marked the formal end of the legal process. In a case filled with complexity and controversy, the conviction brought a legal conclusion, even if it didn't bring emotional closure to a story that had consumed a family, a community, and public attention for years. Karina Vetrano's family says they want her to be remembered for more than just the circumstances of her death. Through scholarships, memorial initiatives, and community efforts, they are trying to keep her name and her story alive in the community she loved.
Something so tragic and despicable. We have something good coming out of this. We have a scholarship.
Amid all the legal battles, appeals, and public debates, one person often faded into the background: Karina Vetrano. Her life, not the legal fight that unfolded after her death, remained the true center of this story. And in the end, that's where this story returns. Karina Vetrano was a daughter, a friend, a young woman building her future, someone who worked with children and filled her days with routine, purpose, and plans. On an ordinary summer evening, she stepped out of her home to do something she had done countless times before. She went for a run, and she never came back. That simple, devastating reality became the heart of this case. How an ordinary moment can suddenly become irreversible, and how the loss of one life can leave a silence that a family, a community, and everyone who followed her story can feel for years.
A memorial as beautiful as Karina Vetrano, tucked away in Spring Creek Park, where a butterfly made of stones, an angel, and candles sit. But perhaps the most important fixture of all, her father, who returns here every morning to remember his daughter.
It's the only place I could go to get peace. And it might seem strange because right where I'm sitting is where I found her. But I think because it's the only place where I have any control.
If she could be here today, or you could speak to her today, what would you say to her?
I speak to her every day. Every single day I speak to her. And she speaks to us in volumes.
Karina's father says her voice will always be heard, from the sound of the birds here to the writings on her blog. And they plan to find a way to get her work put into a book. How do you think Karina would want to be remembered?
Just as she is. Just as everybody sees her. She's special, she was smart, she was beautiful, and she was destined for greater things. And she has achieved that. We don't know what the rest of our life is going to be like. But it's a good feeling to know that now we could move forward.
I'm hearing little bits and stories from friends of Tawny that Tawny was living in fear of Vicky. We all loved her, but
but there was really something was not right.
The knife was already in her hand while the car was still moving. Tawny was behind the wheel, no one next to her. Victoria was in the back seat. They had just dropped off a friend. Just a few seconds earlier, everything looked normal. Then the argument started out of nowhere. Victoria pulled a knife from her pocket and started stabbing her while the car was still in motion, blow after blow. Tawny was losing control of the vehicle. The car crashed in a parking lot in West Ogden. But that didn't stop the attack. Victoria kept stabbing her, again and again, almost 50 wounds. After that, she moved Tawny's body into the passenger seat, and she kept driving for a while. Then she started calling people she knew. By the time the police arrived, Victoria was already there, waiting. She calmly said what she had done, told them where the knife was. Tawny was found in the car, no signs of life. Just a few hours earlier, they had been on their way to visit someone, laughing together, driving back home together. They had been a couple for 5 years. People saw them as inseparable, but what was really happening between them, almost no one saw it. Alright guys, I'm gonna pause for just a minute. I'm really curious where my audience is from, so drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching this from and what time it is for you right now. Thanks for your attention. I really appreciate it. Go ahead and share that in the comments, and I'll keep going. Tawny Marie Bird was born in June 1993 to her parents, Dana Anderson and Casey Baird. Her parents split up when she was just 1 year old, but they stayed on good terms. Casey was always in touch with his daughter, spending holidays with her and staying involved in her life. Family members said Tawny was like a natural-born leader, someone who loved being social and surrounded by people. Her dad even said she had so many loyal, loving friends, it felt like she had this whole circle of people just drawn to her. She lived in Holiday, not far from Salt Lake City, Utah. She enrolled at Salt Lake City Community College and worked as an assistant accountant. She was ambitious, dreamed of becoming a well-known singer, and hoped that one day she'd live in California, near the ocean. When Tawny was 17, she was riding in a car with a group of older friends smoking marijuana when they got pulled over by a police officer. The officers searched the car and found more drugs and paraphernalia in the back seat. One of her friends later said that Tawny took the blame for everything, understanding that her older friends could have faced much harsher consequences. She was charged with a Class B misdemeanor possession of a controlled substance. Her father, Casey, got really worried he had his own history with addiction and decided to reach out to her probation officer. He asked for random drug testing to be set up, but the officer said they didn't have the authority to do that, and the issue was referred to juvenile court. Tawny was placed under the care of the Division of Child and Family Services and was put into foster care with her aunt. After that, she was sent to a youth treatment center for 90 days. That's where she met Victoria Mendoza. Victoria had a really difficult life. She lost her father to suicide when she was just 10 years old. She often ran away from home and skipped school. She had been in and out of different youth facilities. On top of losing her dad, her mother was terminally ill with cancer, and they were living in a small one-bedroom apartment in Ogden with almost no money. Dana said her daughter was in a very vulnerable state when they met. This wasn't Victoria's first time in a place like that, but for Tawny, it was. And Tawny, really gravitated toward Victoria, feeling safe around her. Family and friends said it was a classic case of opposites attract. Victoria was much quieter and easily jealous, while Tawny was more playful and flirty, and that often created tension between them. Still, they shared something important, a love for music. They would often write lyrics and songs for each other. What started as a friendship quickly turned into a romantic relationship, and they became inseparable. After completing the 90-day program, Tawny was released, and about a month later, Victoria was released too. Tawny and her father, Casey, went to pick Victoria up. Casey later said that the moment he saw Victoria, he felt thrown off. They were just so different. Something inside him told him that something about his daughter's new relationship wasn't right, and it made him uneasy. He said that there was just something about Victoria that made him feel uncomfortable, but he understood how important this relationship was to his daughter, so he accepted it. Dana also welcomed Victoria into her home, and the whole family treated her warmly. Her best friend Lacey said Victoria could be a little rough around the edges, but it was obvious they had a strong connection and really understood each other. They often posted photos and videos on social media, looking like a couple that was genuinely in love. But, As it usually goes, social media doesn't always reflect reality. Tension in their relationship slowly started to build, and they broke up and got back together many times. When Victoria cheated on Tawny with one of her friends, she uploaded a video to YouTube, begging Tawny to forgive her and come back.
I have a lot of things on my mind that I want to say, but I keep going blank because I know that I'm recording myself and I know that I'm doing, I know that I'm on video and stuff, but I'm going to just start from where I feel like I need to start and end where I need to end. First I want to say is I'm sorry for hurting you and cheating on you with your best friend. And your best friend is a slut, and I don't like her. She's gross, and I can give a fuck less. Alright? So, this video is like an apology to you. And the girl I'm talking about is Tawny. And I'm trying to get her back to be with me so I can keep her again and for her to give me another chance. Because I'm in love with her and I love her and I want her back. And I'll do anything I have to do to show her that I can be a better girlfriend. We met in Artec, and I liked you, and I wanted to get to know you and stuff. And one of the letters you wrote me in Artec I read all the time because it meant a lot to me, and it's probably like one of my favorite letters I have from you or whatever. But it says Victor at the top, and it says, I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop thinking about you either. I miss you so much. I wish so much that you were getting out earlier for real. I miss you so much now. I don't know how I'm going to be when I can't see you for that long. I like you so much, really. I'm usually different when I like someone a lot. I don't want to be with them all the time, and I don't always miss them as much as I miss you. It's different. I'm so happy that I met you for real. I talked to my aunt, and she said, right when you get out, we can hang out, because I told her you don't do drugs and you want to do good when you get out. Whenever I see you, I just want to jump on you. You make me so happy. I'm not afraid to tell people I like you. It doesn't weird me out at all. My family and some knows already, because I always talk about you, so I always think about you. I already really trust you, and I care about you a lot. When they're being assholes to you in Artec, it fucking makes me pissed. I always say something, man. And I'm gonna wait for you, Kay. So don't think I'm gonna be out here fucking a bunch of people. No way. You're the only one I want. And I promise I'm being serious about everything I say, Kay. If you think about it, you really meant that. And just look at all the feelings and everything we've been through when we first met each other in our program and then when we got out. Besides the bullshit that I did and all the little notes that you wrote me and all this shit that you got me and all that shit means a lot to me, and I don't want to lose you at all. I really, really, really do love you, and I'm really sorry for everything I did. And I'm just wanting to have you back in my arms again and treat you better than I ever treated any other girl before. Sure, in the hell, don't give a fuck what anyone says about this video. You guys can fuck off and go suck a dick. Because I want to be with somebody, and I'm going to do everything in my power to get her back. Instead of letting her walk free and letting her go to somebody else. That's not what I want. I want her with me. So I'm going to do whatever I have to do in my power. But until then, I'm not single. I'm waiting for somebody.
The couple got back together again. At first, Victoria became really close with Tawny's family. Casey treated her like another daughter, and both he and Dana supported her while her mother was dying from a terminal illness. Casey was even there, in her mother's home, at the moment she passed away. After that, Victoria fully moved into Tawny's family home. She worked hard, really trying to get her life together and build some kind of future. Tawny's grandmother said the family even paid to have some of Victoria's tattoos removed, and everyone supported her, helping her prepare for her first job as a security guard. But pretty soon, the arguments and tension followed them into the house. Dana often stepped in during their conflicts. Even though the fights were getting more intense, she couldn't have imagined just how far Victoria would go. Tawny's grandmother said their relationship had become very codependent, and honestly, pretty unhealthy. Victoria was extremely controlling and jealous of Tawny when it came to other people, but at the same time, they kept trying to make it look like everything was fine. Everything changed when Tawny came home with cuts, a split lip, and a knocked-out front tooth. Dana immediately understood that Victoria was behind it, and said she was going to call the police. "Please, don't," Tawny begged, realizing that now that Victoria was an adult, the consequences would be much more serious. When Casey saw his daughter's tooth was gone and noticed scratches on Victoria's face, he started to suspect that something much more serious was going on. But both of them insisted the injuries came from a fight at a party. And, that was the end of the conversation. Her grandmother said,
"She knew exactly how to manipulate all of us. Like she always knew what to say."
After Victoria knocked out Tawny's tooth, her best friend Lacey was sure that would be the breaking point that Tawny would finally leave her. But, Tawny acted like nothing had happened, and they stayed together. By 2014, Tawny and Victoria had already been together for 5 years. They often drove out to Ogden to visit family, and on October 17, 2014, they did it again. That night, another argument broke out between them. Victoria spent a long time in the bathroom, and when she came back, she insisted they leave right away. The evening ended abruptly. Victoria, Tawny, and Lacey got into the car and headed home. Victoria was sitting in the back seat, still clearly upset about something no one else really understood. Tawny dropped Lacey off at her house. "I love you," Lacey said. "I love you too," Tawny replied. The friends said goodbye. What happened next isn't fully known, but according to Victoria, another argument started between them. And this time, Victoria pulled out a knife. She started stabbing Tawny while she was driving, before Tawny crashed into a parking lot at 2484 East Avenue in West Ogden. Victoria kept stabbing her again and again, leaving nearly 50 wounds. After that, Victoria called several people, including her friend Aaron, just after midnight, when it was already October 18th, and told them what had happened.
Yes, I actually killed someone. She was searching me with something else. You don't understand. I went crazy when I didn't mean to do it, And then I realized after the show, there's someone. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm so scared. You have no idea how scared I am.
The police received the call and immediately headed to the parking lot, responding without hesitation. The alert came in sharp, cutting through the normal flow of the evening, and within minutes, patrol units were already on the move. Flashing lights sliced through the darkness as the tension kept building with every second they got closer. Calls like this, you never really know what you're walking into. It could be anything. That's why the officers moved fast, but carefully preparing for any possible scenario. As they pulled up to the parking lot, it was already clear this wasn't just some Abitchny incident. Something serious had happened, and what they were about to face would require quick decisions and a very steady mindset.
911, what is the address and city of your emergency?
I have to report a murder.
Okay, do you know who was murdered?
Yeah, her name's Tawny.
Law enforcement later said that who exactly made the 911 call was never fully determined. However, based on preliminary findings, it may have been someone Victoria had called shortly before. That detail, adds even more tension to the whole situation, because those final moments before help was called are still kind of unclear, almost like they're missing from the timeline. When officers arrived on scene, the situation already looked critical. Victoria didn't hesitate. She admitted she had pulled a knife with about a 4-inch blade from her front pocket and stabbed Tawny during an argument. Her words were direct, no emotion, just stating what happened. Police immediately asked where the knife was, and she said it was still in the car, like it was just another detail, not the key piece of evidence in a homicide. Tawny was slumped inside the vehicle, completely motionless, with multiple stab wounds across her body. What the officers saw, it was Tashki, even for experienced responders. There were no signs of life. She was pronounced dead at the scene, with no chance of saving her. Further investigation showed that after the attack, Victoria moved Tawny's body into the passenger seat. After that, she kept driving for some time before she started calling friends. And that window of time, it's honestly one of the most disturbing parts. A silent stretch where the worst had already happened, but everything still wasn't over yet.
For news.
The family member was contacted by the suspect, and the family member in turn called 911.
This 22-year-old woman in jail tonight, accused of stabbing her domestic partner to death during an argument. Good evening, everyone. Police say it happened early this morning as the couple was driving home to Salt Lake from Ogden.
News specialist Sandra Yee has been talking to the victims' relatives and is live with our top story. Sandra.
We're live in Holiday, where police say Tawny Baird lived with her partner, who is the suspect in this crime. Now, Baird's father on Facebook told me that he was on his way back to Salt Lake City tonight from a work trip out of state. But on Facebook, he did post that he was lost, hurt, and devastated over the death of his daughter. And he also said that he wants justice.
They were traveling back to Holiday.
But Victoria Mendoza and Tawny Baird never made it out of Ogden. Police say the couple, who had been visiting friends, began to argue during the car ride home. They pulled into this church parking lot on E Avenue where the argument escalated. Police say Mendoza stabbed her domestic partner to death, then called a family member who showed up to the scene and called 911.
But she implicated herself enough that, our initial response to this call was someone was reporting a murder.
They're now looking to see if there was any history of domestic violence. Tawny's aunt, who declined to go on camera, says Tawny was a student at Salt Lake Community College. She said her niece was a kind woman who loved her family. Police say a tragedy like this doesn't have to happen.
If anyone knows anyone that's in a violent domestic situation, feel free to report it to law enforcement, and so we can intervene before something like this takes place.
This heartbroken mom tells me she wishes she could have done more to protect her child, and now she's urging victims of domestic violence to get out.
21 years she's been my baby, and it's not fair. She lights up a room. She's just always so happy.
A beautiful, blonde, 21-year-old college student, Tawny had been dating 22-year-old Vicky Mendoza for about 5 years. They'd been living in Dana's Holiday home for 2.
I've taken Vicky in as a daughter, loved her. My daughter came home a couple months ago, just bawling in the middle of the night, woke me up crying, and her tooth was gone. And Vicky had punched her in the face and knocked her tooth out.
Dana always threatened to call police, but was always convinced not to.
They just begged me not to do it. I was so stupid. I should have done it.
By early Saturday morning, she says it was too late.
All of a sudden, see the policeman pull up. And so I knew, she was gone.
Victoria was charged with first-degree murder, one of the most serious crimes in the criminal justice system, carrying the harshest possible consequences. The wording itself sounded strogo and absolute, immediately making it clear just how serious this case was and the level of responsibility she was facing. The atmosphere around the case kept getting more intense, because every detail pointed to the masshtabi of the tragedy and the fact that there was no turning back. At first, bail was set at $100,000, a number that, on its own, already showed how serious the charges were. But later, that decision was reconsidered, and the bail was completely revoked. That move meant the risks were considered too high, both in terms of public safety and the possibility that she could try to avoid justice. From that point on, she remained in custody with no option for release, waiting for the next court decisions in a case that was only gaining more momentum.
Felony murder charges in the stabbing death of her 21-year-old girlfriend, Tawny Baird. Now, most of the hour-long hearing today was spent arguing over the bail amount for Mendoza and whether or not the accused murderer is a threat to the public.
Deputy District Attorney for Weber County, Chris Allred, admitted he was surprised to hear Victoria Mendoza's defense attorney argue she wasn't a threat to the public.
I feel our case is incredibly strong. There's overwhelming evidence, we believe. So I don't anticipate there being any problems. I don't know what sort of defenses that they might raise at this point, but I don't see any obvious concerns.
Mendoza's bail was initially set at $100,000. That amount was later temporarily revoked and a no bail order was set. Monday, the judge ordered to uphold the no bail despite the defense arguing it was preemptive punishment for Mendoza.
The argument was that it's against the constitutional requirements that she has. And that's the issue more than anything. My job is to stand up for the Constitution, and that's what I intended to do.
Family and friends of Baird left the courtroom happy with the judge's decision.
I'm very happy. The no bail. It's appropriate on a murder. 46 times stab.
I was really happy that we got the no bail for Vicky today. so they can see how dangerous she is and, what she's done.
Now, Carly, any indication of how she's going to plea?
The defense team has not mentioned that at all. We haven't heard from her at all either. Of course, it's still early. But today, the prosecution did mention that initially Mendoza has admitted to the crime several times. Apparently, they say.
According to the defense, her initial position in court was clear and firm, not guilty. In the early stages of the process, she stood by that claim, holding on to it despite the growing pressure and the increasingly strong evidence against her. In the courtroom, it felt like she was clinging to her last line of defense, even as the situation started turning against her. During the hearings, her behavior raised concerns. In the already tense atmosphere of the courtroom, she even threatened to take her own life. Those words came out sharp and unsettling, adding even more intensity to everything that was happening. It reflected the pressure building inside her, and just how overwhelming the psychological weight of the case had become at every stage.
It isn't my client who's a danger to the community. It's the supporters that seems to be of Mr. Barrett on his Facebook page who are making threats to Miss Mendoza.
Is that a consideration I should take into account?
No, it's not. But the state, what's going on is the state says that Miss Mendoza is a risk to society or a danger to the community when she's not. She's not the one who's making the threats against her.
We're also concerned that she may be a danger to others, Your Honor. In this case, the defendant, Miss Baird, had gotten into an argument while they were traveling, looks like on I-15. The defendant stated that Baird had, quote, smacked her and pulled her hair, which caused the defendant to become enraged and to snap. The defendant then proceeded to draw her knife and stab Miss Baird in excess of 40 times. Your Honor, if a person can snap and violently attack and kill another person with such little provocation, with such disproportionate response, we're concerned that she could also snap or become enraged in the community. All right, thank you, counsel. Very well written briefs, well argued. I appreciate it.
Given how strong the evidence already was, and the fact that it kept growing stronger with each passing day, as police continued gathering statements from friends and family, the situation for the defense was becoming, almost impossible. Every new interview, every clarified detail only reinforced the overall picture, leaving less and less room for denial or alternative explanations. The atmosphere around the case kept getting more intense, and the weight of the evidence became undeniable. In those circumstances, her attorneys, understanding the real risks and potential consequences, advised her to change her position on pleading. It wasn't an easy decision. It meant abandoning her original defense and basically admitting that the evidence left no real chance of acquittal. They were trying to minimize the possible sentence, knowing that continuing to deny everything would only make things worse. In the end, Victoria Mendoza pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. That moment became a turning point in the case. A short but tejolious statement that finally Zakrapila her legal responsibility and put an end to any question about her guilt.
Well, I understand that they're hurt and I'm hurt as well. I have no excuse for what I've done, that's the main reason why I pled guilty. I did knock out her tooth, but her family also covered it. I really have nothing to say. I'm I'm the monster here, so.
This is a case that is not a life without parole case. It's up to the board when if she gets out. A lot of things that could have been said, but the reality is no matter what happened, Ms. Mendoza took somebody's life and she's pled guilty to that, so we're prepared for formal sentencing now.
My daughter Tawny had her whole life ahead of her. Tawny was a beautiful girl with lots of wonderful aura. When she walked into a room, you could feel the love and see the wonderful personality in Tawny. Tawny had a lot of dreams, like being an actress, being in the music industry, among a lot of others.
Casey, along with other family members, held back their emotions but couldn't hide the pain as they pleaded with 2nd District Court Judge Joseph Bean to sentence the 23-year-old defendant to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was filled with this heavy, tense silence, broken only by the trembling voices of her loved ones. Every word they spoke felt like a desperate attempt to show just how deep their loss was and how irreversible the tragedy had become. They were asking for the harshest punishment, hoping it might bring at least some sense of justice and make sure she would never walk free again. But Judge Bean, staying composed and strictly within the law, said his hands were tied. He explained that he didn't have the legal authority to impose a harsher sentence than a range of 16 years to life in prison. The reason was that the case was not classified as aggravated murder, which automatically ruled out life without parole. His words came across cold and emotionless, portraying via the harsh reality of the legal system, where even the strongest emotions can't change the limits set by law.
Yeah, this morning, a judge handed down her sentence, but the victim's family says they're not satisfied with the court's decision.
It's clear that Tani was, I think, a bright light.
Victoria Mendoza accepted responsibility for the crime.
Of murder in the first degree, 16 years to life in prison.
Do I wish it would have been harsher? Absolutely. I asked for life without parole.
Family members say they understand the sentence, but think Mendoza should have been charged with aggravated murder, which could have carried a stiffer penalty.
I don't see what wasn't aggravated about stabbing my daughter 46 times and then letting her bleed out.
Court will remand Ms. Mendoza into the custody of the Department of Corrections.
The Board of Pardons determined that Victoria would not be eligible to apply for parole until she had served nearly 24 years in the Utah State Prison. This wasn't just some formality, it came after a detailed review of the case, the severity of the crime, and the potential risks involved. All those years, she'll remain behind bars, in strict conditions where every single day is controlled and regulated. Any future chance of release will depend on a series of evaluations and psychological assessments conducted during her sentence. Those findings will ultimately decide whether she's still considered a danger to society and whether she could ever realistically be given a chance at freedom. While in prison, despite the restrictions and constant supervision, Victoria somehow managed to create a TikTok account and a YouTube channel. And that raised serious concerns because that kind of activity directly violates the Utah Department of Corrections policy on unauthorized communication with the outside world. In a place where access to technology is tightly controlled, the fact that those accounts even existed brings up major questions about how effective that control really is. A spokesperson later stated that no one was aware of these accounts. And honestly, that sounds pretty alarming, considering the level of security that's supposed to be in place in facilities like this. Right now, the situation is under official review. Authorities are trying to figure out how this even happened, who might have been involved, and whether internal procedures meant to prevent something like this were actually violated.
I had no idea about 99% of the violence in their relationship. I still feel this agromnia guilt. There are things I wish I had known sooner and things I wish I had done differently. I truly believe she would still be alive today if I had really understood what was going on.
Just before the second anniversary of the disappearance of 31-year-old mother of two Elizabeth Sullivan, a woman's body was discovered in a water canal not far from her home. Investigators quickly confirmed the identity. It was Elizabeth. Her body showed signs of stab wounds. For nearly 2 years, police had been trying to figure out what happened to the woman who had seemingly vanished from her own home in San Diego. At first, the case was anything but clear. Before she disappeared, Elizabeth had transferred money into her personal account. She had been having conflicts with her husband. Friends were aware that she was involved in an affair. Investigators had even received reports from people who claimed they had seen her alive after she was reported missing. But once her body was found, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Detectives returned to the house where Elizabeth had last been seen alive. They began searching every room, every corner. And then, in the attic above her husband's bedroom, they found an item that had the potential to change the entire case. Forensic testing revealed that it contained Elizabeth's blood. And on the handle, investigators found the DNA of her husband, Matthew Sullivan. But that was only the beginning, because detectives also started taking a closer look at another strange detail they had noticed from the very first days of the investigation, something that hadn't seemed important at the time. An empty freezer in the garage. And when investigators began looking into what it might actually have been used for, they uncovered a theory so disturbing that it shocked even seasoned detectives. A theory that could explain where Elizabeth had been for nearly 2 years after her disappearance. Hey guys, let me grab you for just a second. I'm really curious where my audience is watching from. So I'd love for you to drop a comment and tell me what city you're in and what time it is for you right now. Thanks for taking a moment. Go ahead and share that in the comments. And now let's keep going. When Elizabeth Sullivan was reported missing in the fall of 2014, San Diego police immediately suspected foul play. As the days and weeks passed, those suspicions only grew stronger, but there was very little evidence showing what had actually happened to the young mother. Her friends were convinced that something terrible had happened to her. Her family, however, was not so certain. Elizabeth Sullivan was a complicated woman, but she was also fiercely independent. It seemed entirely possible that her disappearance had been planned. Maybe Elizabeth simply did not want to be found. 31-year-old Elizabeth Sullivan, a mother of two, was known for her larger-than-life personality. According to her closest friends, she was not only charismatic, stylish, and funny. What impressed people most was her intelligence. Friends and acquaintances alike were drawn to Elizabeth because she was smart, well-read, and creative. In the fall of 2014, Elizabeth was living in the Liberty Station neighborhood of San Diego, California. She shared a home with her husband Matthew and their two daughters, who were 2 and 4 years old. The area had once served as a naval training center, and the house the Sullivan family rented was a spacious, multi-level residence. Life in California was still relatively new for Elizabeth. Just a few years earlier, she had left her home state of Virginia after falling in love with Matthew, who served in the United States Navy. Matthew had been transferred from the large naval base in Norfolk, Virginia, to California only a few months after their relationship began. Even so, Elizabeth packed up her life and moved across the country with him. Before long, they got married, and soon afterward, their first daughter was born. Once the family settled into life in San Diego, Elizabeth found a new rhythm. Matthew's military service required deployments and assignments away from home, some short and some much longer. While he was gone, Elizabeth built a life of her own. She made friends and maintained a very active social life. That continued until October 14th, when the San Diego Police Department, known as SDPD, made an official announcement. Elizabeth Sullivan had been reported missing. It was her close friend Nathan Character who contacted police after becoming concerned about her disappearance. Nathan later said he simply had a bad feeling, as though something might have happened to Elizabeth. She had last been seen at home the day before. The last person known to have seen her there was her husband Matthew, who happened to be in San Diego between military assignments at the time. Detectives with SDPD's Missing Persons Unit determined that Elizabeth's vehicle was still parked in the garage. The home was somewhat messy, but there was nothing that clearly pointed to a crime or raised immediate alarm. Matthew told investigators that one of the family's suitcases appeared to be missing. Detectives also learned that just one day before she disappeared, Elizabeth had transferred all of the remaining money from the joint bank account she shared with Matthew, more than $1,000, into her personal account. It could have been a sign that she intended to leave on her own. In an effort to better understand Elizabeth Sullivan and what may have been going on in her life, investigators carefully reviewed her personal journals. There, they discovered evidence of her creative side. The journals contained fictional stories about a woman who fell under the spell of a handsome Navy sailor, a white knight as Elizabeth described him. In her story, the knight and his beloved begin a new life in California and eventually become the parents of a beautiful daughter. The similarities between the fictional story and Elizabeth's real life were impossible to ignore. In the fantasy, the main character eventually grows disappointed with both her new life and her white knight. She leaves everything behind and starts over. Could this fantasy have reflected reality once again? The last text message sent from Elizabeth's phone was on October 13th. It was her final contact with friends and family. A few days later, her phone was turned off. As for Matthew, he was concerned about his wife's disappearance, but he was not shocked by her absence. It appeared that one aspect of Elizabeth's vibrant personality was a tendency to become emotionally unstable from time to time. Shortly after returning home from deployment for a brief period, Matthew invited his mother, Michelle Sullivan, and her partner to move in with them in San Diego. He believed having his mother's help with 2 young children would be beneficial. Matthew even purchased airline tickets for them and prepared for their arrival, but Elizabeth was completely against the idea. She did not get along with her mother-in-law and insisted that they should not be living under the same roof. Just a few days before Nathan reported her missing, Elizabeth left home after an argument with her husband and did not return that night. Matthew told SDPD investigators that this kind of behavior was not unusual for his wife. He worried about her, but she had always come back before. This time, however, the argument had been particularly serious. Maybe this time he thought she had left for good. As unlikely as Matthew's explanation may have sounded to investigators, they had no concrete evidence that a crime had occurred. And the deeper they looked into Elizabeth Sullivan's life, the more complicated the picture became. Interviews with friends and relatives revealed that Elizabeth and Matthew had essentially been living separate lives for years. Because of Matthew's frequent and extended deployments with the Navy, he spent long periods away from home. During that time, Elizabeth had grown accustomed to thinking and living like a single parent. Her life became increasingly independent from her husband's. As a result, it became harder and harder for Matthew to fit back into family life each time he returned home. By the fall of 2014, friends of the couple said the marriage had been unhappy for quite some time, despite the fact that they had not been married all that long. There had been allegations of domestic violence, and police had been called to their home on multiple occasions. To cope with the stress, Elizabeth began abusing medication, including drugs that had not been prescribed to her. She had also started a relationship with a man she met through Tinder. It appeared that Elizabeth Sullivan was living a double life. At home, she was a wife trying to keep her family from falling apart and a loving mother devoted to her daughters. But there was another side of Elizabeth, one investigators were learning more about every day. She had a lover and several dangerous habits. On October 19th, police confirmed that Elizabeth had been seen at the soccer fields in Liberty Station. The sighting reportedly occurred 2 days after she had been declared missing. SDPD told reporters that 2 off-duty sheriff's deputies had made the observation. That morning, they were at the park watching their child play soccer. And that was not all. The deputies had actually spoken with Elizabeth in person. They said she appeared disheveled and may have been under the influence of some kind of substance. Elizabeth told them she had not been home the previous night. She also said that she had lost her phone. The deputies helped her search for it, but they were unable to find it. After Elizabeth had been missing for an entire week, police confirmed yet another reported sighting. This time, she was allegedly seen near San Diego International Airport.
I feel like she's in trouble, and I've come out here from Virginia to look for her, to let her know we're here. It can happen to you, and when it does, it gets very personal. And it takes on a whole new light when it happens to you. And you get a strength like you never had before, because that's my daughter. I'm bringing her home. We aren't going to let this go.
By November of 2014, a full month after Elizabeth had been reported missing, there had been no new confirmed sightings or information about her whereabouts. That month, Matthew decided to speak publicly about his wife's disappearance and gave an interview to People magazine. During the interview, he told the publication, "I'm barely holding it together. I don't even know where to look for her anymore. I keep walking around the neighborhood, hoping that maybe, somehow, I'll catch a glimpse of her. I think about her all the time. I can't stop. What worries me most is our girls. I just have to keep moving forward, do everything I need to do for them, and keep praying." By that point, the missing persons investigators had already looked into the reported sighting of Elizabeth near the airport and determined that it was false. However, they still considered the accounts from the witnesses who claimed to have seen her at the park to be credible. Police continued distributing her photograph and description to the public in hopes that new leads would come in. At the same time, SDPD investigators were paying close attention to the behavior of Elizabeth's outwardly grieving husband. While Matthew told People magazine that he was getting through the ordeal with the support of the Navy community, Elizabeth's friends noticed that it was not the only support he seemed to have. Less than a month after his wife disappeared, Matthew had already started dating again. Even more surprising, just a few months later, he moved his new girlfriend into the home in Liberty Station. 10 months passed after Elizabeth's disappearance. Police announced that there were still no signs of Elizabeth Sullivan and that the investigation had effectively reached a dead end. Then, on October 4th, 2016, just 1 week before the second anniversary of her disappearance, the body of a woman was found floating in a canal near Liberty Station. The San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office confirmed that the remains belonged to Elizabeth Sullivan. Investigators found evidence of injuries caused by a sharp object. In other words, Elizabeth had been stabbed to death. The case was immediately transferred to SDPD's homicide unit for a full murder investigation. On the very day Elizabeth's body was discovered, Matthew Sullivan was in the middle of packing up and preparing to move into a new home. He and his new girlfriend were expecting a baby and needed more space. Despite the shocking turn in Elizabeth's case, Matthew did not change his plans. Just 3 days after her body was recovered from the water, he moved out of state. Now that it was clear Elizabeth had been murdered, facts that had been known since the earliest days of the investigation suddenly took on a very different meaning. Homicide detectives reviewed Elizabeth's bank accounts and financial records. They discovered that the more than $1,000 she had transferred into her personal account had never been touched. Elizabeth died before she ever had the chance to spend that money. One transaction on her credit card, however, immediately caught investigators' attention. It was a payment to an attorney, a divorce attorney. For a long time, there had been signs that the marriage was in serious trouble. Separate bedrooms, police calls to the home, tension surrounding the planned move of Matthew's mother into their house, and about a month before she disappeared, Elizabeth admitted to her husband that she was having an affair. After that, arguments began over the future custody of their children. It appeared that Matthew believed Elizabeth was planning to make false allegations against him to law enforcement in an effort to get him arrested. If that happened, she could potentially gain sole custody of the children. On the day Elizabeth disappeared, Matthew called 911 and reported his concerns.
San Diego Police, this is Melanie.
Hi, I have concerns. My wife is trying to have me, evicted or arrested from my house and take my children away from me.
Okay.
I mean, she took my personal credit card, used it to hire a lawyer against me. I haven't been served with any papers yet, but I know she's called your department earlier this morning, and I think that's where she's headed now to try to get me detained.
And she said that she took all the money out of your shared bank account?
I just checked. It's all gone. There's nothing. Maybe 15 cents left. I'm still here with my children, and I don't know what she's doing.
If she comes back and there's some problems, or you can call us back when she's there.
Okay.
After Matthew moved out of state, SDPD detectives carried out yet another search of the home in Liberty Station. By that point, the investigation had been ongoing for years, and investigators were still examining every detail that might help them finally determine what had happened to Elizabeth Sullivan. This time, law enforcement arrived with a much clearer idea of the kind of evidence that might still be hidden inside the house. Years of investigative work had provided new information and opened up new avenues to explore. Detectives focused particular attention on the attic above the room that had once served as Matthew's bedroom. Officers carefully removed insulation from between the wooden beams and began methodically searching every accessible space. The work was slow and exhausting. Investigators examined every corner, every narrow gap, and every location where a potentially important piece of evidence could have been concealed. Eventually, their persistence paid off. Hidden within the attic structure, they discovered a military-style folding knife. For investigators, it was a major breakthrough. The knife was immediately sent to a laboratory for forensic testing and analysis of any biological evidence that might be present. The results proved significant. Testing revealed the presence of Elizabeth Sullivan's blood on the blade and other parts of the knife. At the same time, Matthew's DNA was found on the handle. The combination of those findings carried enormous weight for the investigation. After years of searching, detectives believed they had finally uncovered physical evidence that directly connected the key individuals in the case. According to investigators and prosecutors, this was the piece of evidence they had been missing to bring the case to completion. On January 31, 2018, Matthew Sullivan was arrested outside his new home in Wyoming, Delaware. Following his arrest, the process began to return him to California for prosecution. He was later extradited to California, where formal charges awaited him and preparations for trial moved forward. As prosecutors prepared their case, however, they encountered a problem that would need to be explained to a jury. It involved a fact that, at first glance, appeared to contradict the prosecution's theory. Two forensic pathologists, working independently of one another, reached the same conclusion regarding the condition of Elizabeth's remains. Based on the level of decomposition, they believed her death had occurred not approximately 2 years earlier, but roughly 2 months before her body was discovered. For prosecutors, this raised a serious question. The state of California maintained that Elizabeth had been killed on the night of October 13, 2014, the last day friends and family had communicated with her and the last time she was definitively known to be alive. If that theory was correct, investigators needed to explain why the autopsy findings suggested a much shorter period of decomposition. Detectives continued searching for an answer. Eventually, they put forward an explanation that they believed reconciled all of the known facts. During one of the searches of the house, specially trained cadaver dogs alerted to a large standalone freezer. At the time it was examined, the freezer was empty. No human remains were found inside. However, the dog's reaction immediately caught investigators' attention. Police theorized that the freezer may previously have been used to store a human body. Looking back at the records from the original search of the home, investigators remembered another important detail. At that time, the same freezer had been plugged in and operating. When officers opened the freezer in the garage during the initial search, next to Elizabeth's vehicle, it too had been empty. Prosecutors later presented their own reconstruction of what they believed had happened. According to the prosecution, the freezer became empty only after its contents had been moved or hidden elsewhere. They argued that Matthew had used it to store Elizabeth's body for an extended period of time. In the prosecution's view, this theory explained the discrepancy between the alleged date of death and the degree of decomposition observed by forensic experts. Prosecutors contended that the body could have remained frozen for nearly 2 years. According to their theory, when the time came for Matthew to relocate to Delaware, he decided to dispose of the remains once and for all. The prosecution argued that this was when the body was removed and left in the water. Investigators believed he expected Elizabeth to remain hidden forever, and that the true circumstances of her death would never be discovered.
It's our belief that the evidence will show the defendant killed Elizabeth by stabbing her with a knife. He then hid the body.
It's an incredible loss. They have 2 beautiful children. They have a long storied history, and Mr. Sullivan, as I stated in court, is a Navy veteran who's traveled the world defending freedom, and it is now going to be his chance to be served by the institutions that he defended.
The trial of Matthew Sullivan began on February 21st, 2020. After years of investigation, countless searches, and an extensive effort to gather evidence, the case had finally reached the courtroom. This was where both sides would present their versions of events, and where the jury would be asked to evaluate the evidence and testimony before reaching a final verdict. During the proceedings, the defense attorney worked to challenge several of the prosecution's key claims. The defense argued that Elizabeth was an unpredictable person who had disappeared for periods of time in the past, without informing family members, friends, or acquaintances of her plans. According to the attorney, that pattern of behavior made it difficult to determine exactly what might have happened after she went missing. The defense also argued that Elizabeth struggled with drug abuse. The attorney maintained that this was an important factor in understanding her lifestyle and could have influenced the events leading up to her disappearance. The defense devoted particular attention to one of the prosecution's central theories. The attorney insisted that the claim involving the freezer remained only a theory. According to the defense, despite the suspicions and speculation surrounding it, there was no direct evidence proving that Elizabeth had ever been kept inside a freezer. The defense emphasized that the theory relied on conclusions and interpretations rather than indisputable physical evidence. The attorney also directed the jury's attention to the results of the many searches conducted throughout the investigation. Law enforcement officers repeatedly searched the home that had become one of the primary focal points of the case. They examined rooms, conducted extensive searches, and looked for any trace that might help determine Elizabeth's fate. Yet, as the defense pointed out, Elizabeth herself was never found there. In addition, after Elizabeth disappeared, Matthew continued living in the house with the children. Later, his mother, her partner, and Matthew's new girlfriend also lived there. The defense stressed that many people passed through the home over an extended period of time, yet none of them discovered any obvious signs suggesting that Elizabeth had remained there after her disappearance. According to the attorney, these circumstances raised questions about certain elements of the prosecution's theory. For that reason, the defense urged jurors to carefully scrutinize every piece of evidence and to distinguish between assumptions and facts that had been directly established during the trial.
The evidence will show that Elizabeth's family and her friends will report a history of finding a man, finding independence, deciding abruptly to turn the page on her life, and not necessarily sharing with everybody who would otherwise be included normally in such a decision. Her father will tell you about this pattern. Her friends will tell you about this pattern. Her friends from Virginia and her friends from San Diego. You're not going to hear one bit of evidence of Matthew Sullivan trying to secret away parts of his home. And at the end of the day, when the evidence is all put through, after several witnesses, it will not be able to divert your attention from the fact that the evidence is consistent with the life that Elizabeth Sullivan had led to that point, and that while her passing, while tragic, cannot be attributed to Matthew Sullivan.
By the time the trial began, one detail that had previously raised significant questions for investigators had finally been explained. The off-duty law enforcement officers who had earlier claimed they saw Elizabeth in a park after she had been reported missing were no longer confident in their original recollection. After taking a closer look at the timeline and circumstances, they concluded that they had most likely confused the dates. It eventually became clear that the encounter with Elizabeth had indeed taken place. However, it had occurred several days before her disappearance, not afterward as initially believed. As a result, testimony that had once been viewed as possible evidence that Elizabeth remained alive after October 12th lost its significance. This explanation was further supported during the investigation. Detectives determined that on the night of October 11th, Elizabeth had not returned home. Instead, she spent the night at a homeless shelter. That information matched what Elizabeth herself had previously told sheriff's deputies during their encounter in the park. For investigators, this became an important detail that helped reconstruct the events of those days more accurately and establish the correct timeline. The following morning, on October 12th, Elizabeth disappeared. 2 days later, she was reported missing. Even though the early reports claiming Elizabeth had been seen after her disappearance were ultimately dismissed, other circumstances remained that the defense used to support the argument that she may have stayed alive after October 14th. One of those circumstances involved testimony from her lover, Steve Sutton. During the early stages of the investigation, Steve was reluctant to cooperate with detectives. He hired an attorney and refused to take a polygraph examination, which drew additional attention from investigators and raised questions about his possible role in the case. Only later, after detectives ruled him out as a suspect, did Steve agree to discuss certain events that he believed might be relevant to the investigation. He claimed that several weeks after the search for Elizabeth began, he started receiving messages from someone pretending to be her. According to Steve, the emails came from an unfamiliar address. Each message was signed with Elizabeth's name, causing him to wonder who was really behind the correspondence. To test the sender, Steve asked a question about a key fob for a hot tub, a detail connected to a location where the two of them had spent time together. It was a question that, in his view, only a very limited number of people would have been able to answer correctly. To his surprise, the response was correct. Matthew's defense team later pointed to this detail. The attorneys argued that such information could only have been known by Elizabeth herself and cited it as a possible point in support of their version of events. However, there was a major problem with that story. Despite claiming the emails existed, Steve Sutton was unable to provide investigators with the actual messages for examination. According to him, he had already deleted the emails by that point. Because the messages were unavailable, investigators had no way to perform a technical analysis, identify the true sender, or verify the circumstances Steve described. As a result, the story remained one of many disputed and controversial details discussed during the trial.
Once you were no longer dating Elizabeth Sullivan, did you maintain any communication with her?
Yeah, there would be every now and then text or email. She would reach out when she's like feeling lonely or something like that, and I would respond. I would answer her.
And what was her demeanor, her tone like when you spoke to her?
She seemed happy.
And did you and she talk about what she was doing and what her plan was with respect to Matthew and her marriage?
Yeah, she told me she was getting divorced. She said she was filing a restraint order.
Prosecutors argued that Elizabeth's affair with Steve, along with her intention to end her marriage, provided a key motive for the killing. According to the prosecution, these circumstances created a serious conflict within the family and led to a dramatic escalation in tensions between Elizabeth and Matthew during the period leading up to her disappearance. Throughout the trial, prosecutors repeatedly reminded jurors that Matthew was already aware of Elizabeth's relationship with Steve. According to the state's theory, he also knew that she wanted a divorce and intended to permanently end their marriage. Prosecutors argued that the combination of those factors could have created a powerful emotional trigger and provided a motive for the crime. To support their position, the prosecution called witnesses who knew Elizabeth well and had first-hand knowledge of her family life during the final years before her disappearance. Particular attention was given to testimony from her closest friends. Elizabeth's friends described the condition of the marriage in detail. They spoke about the difficulties, ongoing tension, and problems that, according to them, had existed in the relationship long before she vanished. Their testimony helped jurors better understand the atmosphere within the family and the circumstances the prosecution relied upon when presenting its theory of motive. For the state, these accounts became an important part of the overall case. Prosecutors used them not only to highlight the events of Elizabeth's final days, but also to provide the broader context of the couple's relationship, which they argued was essential to understanding what may have happened.
Things were just not good at home. Matt apparently was making her feel really guilty about it, and she was just a wreck.
Elizabeth's best friend from Virginia, Kendra Harris, remained one of the people closest to her and had a deep understanding of what was happening in her life. Despite the distance between them, the two women stayed extremely close and regularly shared their thoughts, plans, concerns, and everyday experiences with one another. Kendra spoke with Elizabeth on the phone almost every day. Their conversations had become a normal part of their lives. They stayed in constant contact, discussing family matters, personal struggles, and everything else going on around them. Because of that, Kendra had a clear understanding of Elizabeth's emotional state and was familiar with many of the events that unfolded before her disappearance. For investigators, those frequent phone conversations were especially important. The steady communication meant that Kendra could provide valuable insight into Elizabeth's final days and hours, helping detectives piece together the events that occurred shortly before the tragedy. Because they spoke nearly every day, Kendra's testimony eventually became an important part of the larger picture investigators were trying to assemble as they worked to understand the circumstances surrounding the case.
We would have to end our conversations because Matt was either coming, listening, she was afraid he was coming.
Did she seem to be afraid of him?
Yes. She was going to pack her things. She met with an attorney, so far as I know. She met with an attorney, and she was trying to figure out what her rights were, what she could and couldn't do, and yes, she was going to go to a hotel.
On the evening of October 13th, Kendra and Elizabeth spoke on the phone. At the time, it may have seemed like just another ordinary conversation, but it would later take on special significance for investigators trying to reconstruct the final hours before Elizabeth disappeared. During the call, Elizabeth was at home. Her husband, Matthew, was there as well. According to testimony and evidence presented in the case, the atmosphere inside the house was far from peaceful. Tension had been building between the couple for quite some time and had reached a breaking point. By then, Matthew already knew about Elizabeth's affair. He was also aware that she intended to file for divorce and end their marriage. For investigators, those circumstances became important because they pointed to a serious conflict that existed between the couple in the days leading up to the tragedy. According to evidence presented at trial, the news of the affair and the possibility of divorce triggered strong emotions in Matthew. He was extremely angry. Prosecutors argued that this was a period when the marriage was in deep crisis and the tension inside the home had become exceptionally high. While Kendra was speaking with Elizabeth on the phone, the man who had already learned that his marriage was falling apart was in the same house. That conversation, and the circumstances surrounding it, later became one of the details investigators considered significant as they worked to understand what happened in the case.
I told her to lock herself in her room or her girl's room, have a glass of wine, and we just needed to make it to morning.
What was her response to that?
She said, I had my vino, and I'm going to lock myself in my room. I then said, if you feel that seriously about it, if it doesn't get any better, call the police in San Diego.
And did she respond to that?
She said, hold on a sec. And then she said, gotta go, quietly. I didn't hear from her anymore.
And that was your last conversation with Elizabeth?
Yes.
In the bedroom where investigators believed Elizabeth had been hiding during that phone call, forensic specialists conducted a thorough examination in search of any evidence that could reveal what happened inside the house on the day she disappeared. As part of their investigation, they used luminol, a specialized chemical capable of detecting hidden or carefully cleaned blood evidence, even when it is invisible to the naked eye. During the examination, luminol produced a positive reaction on the floor along a path leading from the bedroom to the bathroom. For investigators, this was a significant discovery because the reaction suggested the possible presence of biological evidence in those areas. Additional locations inside the bedroom also drew the attention of forensic experts and required further analysis. Particular attention was focused on evidence found in the bathroom. On the inside of the bathroom door, forensic investigators discovered small blood spatter stains. Although the stains were minor in size, their location was considered important to the reconstruction of events investigators were attempting to establish. The examination revealed another significant finding as well. When specialists lifted the carpeting, they discovered a much larger stain hidden underneath and concealed from ordinary view. That area became one of the primary focuses of subsequent laboratory testing. After conducting forensic analysis, experts determined that the blood belonged to Elizabeth. That result became an important part of the prosecution's evidence and was presented to jurors during the trial. Investigators also determined that the exposed section of carpet where the blood evidence was found had previously been thoroughly cleaned. According to forensic findings, intensive cleaning had taken place in that area, apparently in an effort to remove visible signs of contamination. Jurors were also told about another detail that prosecutors considered significant. According to evidence presented at trial, on October 14th, Matthew Sullivan went to Home Depot and purchased carpet cleaning supplies. Prosecutors pointed to that purchase as a circumstance that should be considered alongside the other evidence in the case. Taken together, these findings and forensic results became an important part of the overall picture that investigators presented to the court during the trial.
Took his rubber knife, and he stabbed her. And then he stabbed her again, and again, and again, and again. He hid her body. He hid the murder weapon, cleaned up the crime scene, and hid it. This is the bank record that shows you his debit card purchase at Ace Hardware to buy that carpet cleaner.
This wasn't the first time she'd left out saying where she was going. It wasn't the first time she'd been gone overnight. Something only somebody who had been in that experience, on that affair, in that adventure could know. The emailer responded with the correct answer. Something only Stephen Sutton and Elizabeth Sullivan could have known. She was found about 200 yards from the park that we know that she slept in on nights when she would not be at home. Married to a Navy man who had a secret life, who had a history of behavior that was erratic, and who had a history of leaving.
When the jurors retired to the deliberation room, they faced a difficult task that would ultimately determine the outcome of the case. After weeks of testimony, evidence presentations, expert witnesses, and arguments from both sides, the moment had arrived when the decision rested entirely in their hands. The jurors had to decide not only whether Matthew Sullivan was criminally responsible for the death of his wife, equally important was determining the nature of the crime itself and its level of severity. They were required to carefully weigh all of the circumstances, analyze the evidence that had been presented, and decide whether the facts supported a conviction for first-degree murder, second-degree murder, or another possible verdict under the law. Meanwhile, a tense atmosphere filled the courtroom. For Elizabeth's family and loved ones, these were hours of uncertainty, anxiety, and anticipation. For Matthew himself, the outcome of the deliberations could shape the rest of his life. With every passing minute, the tension surrounding a case that had already attracted significant public attention continued to grow. Finally, after completing their deliberations, the jurors returned to the courtroom. Everyone in attendance waited in silence for the decision that would bring the long trial to its conclusion. It was then that the verdict was announced.
We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Matthew Scott Sullivan, not guilty of the crime of first-degree murder. We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Matthew Scott Sullivan, guilty of the crime of second-degree murder.
During the sentencing hearing, Matthew's attorney asked the court to show leniency, emphasizing his military service and the contributions he had made while serving his country. The defense argued that Matthew had spent 8 years in the United States Navy. During that time, he fulfilled his duties as a service member and was ultimately honorably discharged. His attorney maintained that this chapter of his life should be taken into consideration when determining his final sentence. During his military career, Matthew also received several commendations and awards. Among them were the Global War on Terrorism Medal, the Humanitarian Service Medal, and the Navy Good Conduct Medal. The defense pointed to these honors as evidence of his years of service and his positive record during that period of his life. For those who knew and loved Elizabeth, however, those arguments could not change the most important fact. Regardless of military awards, service records, or any other circumstances, they were still living with the consequences of an irreversible loss. For Elizabeth's family, friends, and everyone who cared about her, no sentence could bring her back. No decision handed down by the court could fill the void left by her death. Even after the trial had come to an end, the pain of that loss remained just as real, serving as a constant reminder of a life that had been taken away forever.
Longer sentence won't make the pain go away, nor will my recanting of the sorrow I've gone through these last 6.5 years make this man feel any differently than he does now.
That has caused a tremendous amount of pain to me, Liz's family, and friends. There are no words to describe this pain that still sits in the pit of my heart. I pray that Matt never see or experience freedom again.
Matthew Sullivan was sentenced to a prison term of 16 years to life after being convicted of second-degree murder. The sentence brought a lengthy criminal case to a close, following years of investigation and a trial in which the court examined the circumstances of the crime, the evidence presented, and the testimony offered by both sides. After sentencing, Matthew was transferred into the California State Prison System, where he began serving his sentence in accordance with the court's ruling. According to the most recently available records from the California Correctional System, he will become eligible for parole consideration in August 2028. However, eligibility for parole does not mean automatic release. It simply marks the date when an inmate may formally have their case reviewed by the appropriate parole authorities. Based on the information currently available, August 2028 remains the earliest date on which Matthew Sullivan may be considered for parole under the rules of the California Correctional System.